Grew up in Illinois, moved around the country to a few different places, and now I've settled here in Minnesota. I joined the Navy Reserves in October 2012, and I got out in May of 2018. I didn't go on any deployments. I don't have any fun deployment stories or anything like that, but that's why I'm happy I'm able to help HHO to give back to others who did more than I did. I didn't have any hardships that I dealt with. It was just the hardest thing for me. It was the first time being away from family, but as far as deployments or anything like that, no struggles or issues there. I have two kids, Hudson, who's 6, and Mackenzie, who's 2. Hudson aspires to grow up to be Andy Graff. He wants to be a police officer or a game warden. He's already begging me to go out and go hunting. And my daughter, she's my perfect little angel that can do no wrong as far as I'm concerned. My childhood, I grew up in a rough household. There was some abuse and things like that I dealt with. Luckily, things have changed for the better, but it wasn't exactly the dream scenario growing up. I was difficult growing up, and my parents got divorced when I was young, so growing up in 2 households, it made it was just a rough upbringing. I was introduced to HHO at the game fair in 2021. I met Tony at the booth that HHO had set up. It was good to meet HHO, to be able to associate with fellow veteran service members, law enforcement, who had the same common interests of the outdoors that I had. Growing up, my dad used to pheasant and duck hunt. Unfortunately, when I was about the age I could tag along, he quit hunting. So I actually started duck hunting about 8 years ago with a friend that I met in the Navy Reserves. Absolutely terrible, miserable experience. I went out with my $300 Winchester pump shotgun, hip waders on, fell in the water, buried the gun in the mud before I ever pulled the trigger, missed the one duck we saw all day, and I've been hooked ever since and just started growing that passion towards other things, pheasant hunting, fishing, things that I really had no interest in growing up. I've been on 4 trips to HHO. My first one was the Aiken hunt that Tony and Andy put together. It was about 1.5 years ago now, and to this day we still have the same group chat, still talk to the guys daily. As far as hunting goes, it was not a great hunt. I called Andy by the wrong name for half the trips. I didn't know his real name was Andy. An absolute blast. I'd go back again. Tom's a great host. It was just the camaraderie, the friendship that came from that trip. It was a great time. My second trip was with Chris Simmons. We went duck hunting on the Mississippi. Once again, didn't have the best hunt, but we had a great time, even though the boat motor died in the middle of the river and we were kind of stranded out there for about 4 hours. After that, I did the Minnesota-made ice fishing tournament last year. As a non-native Minnesotan, that was a cool and cold experience for me. Nothing like pulling up to the side of the lake and Tony saying, unbuckle your seatbelt and roll your windows down in case your truck goes through the ice. But overall, it was a great tournament they put on, great experience. And then my last trip that I went on, I wasn't even drawn for. I tore my bicep this past September, and Andy and Tony knew I was in a funk. Against doctor's recommendation and family recommendation, I went and hung out with them on their Aiken trip. So I was in an arm brace and sling, couldn't get my arm wet. They let me tag along and got to hang out with the guys for the weekend. My relationships that I've formed through HHO, they're second to none. I've had lifelong friends that I've made. Tony, Andy, Shane Kemper, Jamie, just to name a few. They've all seen me at my worst. I deal with depression, suicide, things like that, and they've always been there for me. It doesn't matter what time of day. I know I can pick up the phone, call them. Andy's came to my house in the middle of the night when I've been having a bad day. So those are just, lifelong friendships that I've formed through HHO. And I know there's a stigma around men's mental health, and I've never been comfortable opening up or talking about it, asking for help. And it wasn't until after I went on my first Aiken trip that I opened up to those guys. And I've had friends that I've known for 30 years that still to this day, I've never talked to them about it, but I know there's that core group of guys that I can go to with anything, and they'll always be there for me. HHO has helped normalize, or at least address, mental health issues with men and suicide, things like that. They're doing the suicide prevention training with some of their staff members, and then they're getting people to open up and acknowledge that it's a judgment-free zone. They're okay to reach out and talk to and ask for help, ask for support when they need it. As far as the friendships go that I previously mentioned, a great example that these aren't just a 2-day trip or a 1-day trip. These are lifelong bonds that you can form. I spent Thanksgiving at Shane Kemper's house this year. I've hung out with Andy, Tony, Jamie outside of, HHO organized events. I don't remember the last day I went without speaking to somebody from HHO. I knew I was in a dark place with the depression when it got to the point where I felt the need to put a gun barrel in my mouth. Dealing with depression, at least for me, I feel like I'm a nuisance to others a lot of times. Like, I don't want to go to them and drag them down with me. But Tony, Andy, Jamie, Shane, there's been others, but those 4 specifically, they've always been there for me, whether it's showing up at my house just to give me a hug. Texts, phone calls, any time of the day, just listen to me cry on the phone for an hour. Those guys are really probably some of the main reasons I'm still here today. Is there's been a few times I've wanted to quit on me, and I guess they've been too stubborn to let it happen. I recently got accepted as field staff for HHO. I wanted to volunteer my time, my efforts. Like I previously mentioned, I didn't have a crazy military experience, so I wanted to volunteer my time because of what I've received from other HHO members and to give back to those who have given significantly more than I did. So the outdoors for me is almost like therapy. It's not so much the success of the duck hunt, the fishing trip, it's the camaraderie, the brotherhood, the friendship, the bonds that are made while we're out on those trips. And we couldn't do that without everyone's contributions that help make these trips happen. I'm a firm believer, because of the trips, support, and opportunities that HHO provides, that many of us that have been in dark places are still here today. I myself am one of those people, so on behalf of myself and HHO, I'd like to say thank you.